Good afternoon, and welcome in a new session with new guests and a new title this time that is different than the previous session. First of all, I would like to welcome you all and would like to tell you that there is interpretation from Arabic into English and vice versa. You can use interpretation by pressing on the globe at on the screen and then choose the language. Of course, I would like first to welcome you all on behalf of IFIT. This webinar will be entitled An Incremental Roadmap Towards Security Sector Integration in Libya. And this seminar is in the context of the urgent need to find a solution to the security problems in Libya, knowing that there is a division inside the security sector, and there are armed groups, whether legal or illegal, in addition to the formal and informal institutions. We will try to be clear and try to discuss the structures of these institutions and its elements and their loyalty not to the law and the constitution, but unfortunately to other ideologies and movements that are cross-border, and that has led to the weakening of the state, to the monopoly of weapons, to politicization, and to the recurrence of conflicts despite the previous agreements that we had, especially in Tripoli, the capital. And this is what we have witnessed in the previous weeks. And of course, there is a lack of one unified strategy for the restructuring and unification of the state, and there are weak institutions, especially in the security sector. There is abolishing of institutions without finding any alternatives. And of course, the crisis has been aggravated, and we have seen, despite the previous political efforts and the previous political agreements, that there was marginalization of this security track, and this had led to incomplete solutions or delayed solutions. And knowing that security is one of the main pillars of stability in Libya. Of course, in this seminar, we will try to speak about the latest conflicts in Tripoli without digging deep in it. We will try to analyze the political negotiations, the political consent, and the future prospects. We will try to a certain extent also to discuss an alternative that relies on incremental steps, especially with the help of international institutions. And the developmental approach also will be discussed in order to restructure or unify the security sector in a very realistic and sustainable manner. And we'll try to see, of course, or discuss reform attempts that are taking place. We will try, of course, to shed light to ways of contribution in promoting trust between all the parties. A seminar will be divided into three main parts. In the first part, the security track and the political agreements and the repercussions. The second part, discussing the roadmap, the incremental roadmap to build trust and unify the institutional and the security sectors. And the third and last is the conditions of success and the requirements of this success. Of course, allow me today to welcome Dr. Arif, chairman of the Libya Institute for Advanced Studies, and he is the previous ambassador in the Emirates. We have with us also Mr. Fawzi Abdel Ali, who is the former Minister of Interior and a diplomat. The third main speaker also is Ms. Rabia Boras, member of the Libyan House of Representatives. And the session will be an open discussion for 40 and 45 minutes between the guests who will be discussing these main topics and answer questions around every topic, in addition to a 35-minute session open for all the participants, whereby you can ask questions either through the chat or by raising hands. And I will be asking the questions from the chat to the guests. In the last 5 minutes, we will try to summarize the main points that were discussed by the guests. At the end of this seminar, which is the main aim, is coming out with a policy document that will be presented to the decision makers in order to provide for them some solutions or strategies that are to be implemented. I would like to thank you all for your presence and start with the first topic concerning the lack of security track in the agreements. And we will ask the first question to Dr. Arif Nayed. I would like him to give a very simple analysis of the latest conflicts that took place in Tripoli, the armed conflict in specific. And another question, why wasn't the unification of the security sector a priority, whether in previous political agreements, the agreements of 2015 and others? The floor is yours, Dr. Arif. In the name of God, I would like to welcome you all and congratulate you for the Eid. I would like to thank you for inviting me and for organizing this very important seminar in this very delicate period of our country. Allow me to start directly by speaking about the differences. You started by some assumptions. The first assumption was the idea of the lack of security tracks in political agreements. And the second assumption, the importance of the incremental methods in comparison to the comprehensive method. And third assumption, the measures of building trust or regaining trust. In fact, I do not think that the security track was lacking in any of the political agreements. All the previous political agreements included the security track. It is true that this security track was neglected because it wasn't implemented, but it is there in all the agreements, especially in the Sirat agreement, which is a very important agreement that includes the security track, in addition to part on building trust and rebuilding trust. Unfortunately, these weren't implemented, but it is there. In Bali or in Berlin agreement, there is a security track as well, and this meeting in Berlin was supported by the Security Council, and it is mentioned also, the security track is mentioned. The problem is in the implementation, and maybe this lack of implementation is either because of the lack of comprehensive solution, and more specifically because there is lack of understanding of this incremental method. Many things were delayed because they justified their the thing by incremental methods. I think this incremental method might become a pragmatic tactique that is done instead of or that leads to the marginalization of these important tracks. So I do not agree with you. The security track was there in all the political agreements. It wasn't implemented because the international community adopted incremental methods, and the things were not implemented. The issue of trust is very important. If the building trust measures were implemented from the Sirat agreement, the things would have been better in the country. When it comes to the liberation of prisoners, holding accountable those who tormented the prisoners. There are measures for rebuilding trust, but these were not implemented. So they are there in the agreements, but were not implemented. This is what I wanted to shed light on. We can go back to the issue of Tripoli in the following questions, maybe. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Arif. Your notes are very important. I wrote them down, and we will try to reiterate them later on. I will move to Mr. Fawzi Abdelali. Mr. Fawzi, would you please give us a simple analysis for the latest security situation that took place in the capital, Tripoli? And another question, why wasn't the issue of unifying the security sector a priority? Or if it was a priority, why weren't the outcomes of the security track implemented on the ground? Whether the outcomes of the political dialogue of the year 2015 or that of the year 2020. Mr. Fawzi, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Misbah. I would like to thank you and thank all the participants for being with us. At the outset, I find myself agreeing with Dr. Arif's ideas concerning the principles, because the agreements mentioned the security track, and it was mentioned strongly in all the agreements, the previous agreements. But the problem, it is true, the problem was in the implementation. There was a problematic because of the absence of political will. So what we lack is the political will to implement these security measures that were mentioned in the agreements from Sirat to Geneva agreements. And this, in my opinion, has clear reasons. The security track cannot be taken alone because this security track is directly affected by the political track and all the other tracks, in fact. What is taking place currently is a result of this political bottleneck that is taking place in Libya for years now. And therefore, we need a comprehensive vision of the Libyan political situation in general. What is happening in Tripoli currently is a result of this political crisis that is the status quo and the lack of political will in the restructuring the state, because the political powers today are working on strengthening themselves through these tools that are available outside the traditional institutions that are well known for us all. So we might be in need of understanding the scene, or in order to understand the scene, we need to understand the reasons behind these armed wings or security wings that are outside the formal security agencies, and these reasons might always be taken into consideration. We must think of the present and the future, but this is not enough. We need to diagnose the situation objectively, practically, and know what are the problems in order to find the possible solutions. What happened in Tripoli is part of the problems that took place before, and this is not the first time. Every now and then we see armed conflicts in Tripoli between agencies that are supposed to be formal agencies that are linked to the government or the state in general. The conflict that took place in Tripoli was between SSA, so an apparatus that is linked to the presidency, and another to the Ministry of Defense. In order to understand what happened, we need to study the status quo in the last 10 years and the reasons behind the lack of activation of public institutions and the lack of political will in integrating these agencies or dismantling them for the interest of the army and the police agencies. Unfortunately, the opposite is taking place. The institutions are being impeded, and the parallel institutions were established in the aim of filling gaps for specific interim periods, and later on these must have been dealt with and become part of the formal public institutions. But what took place was the opposite. The public institutions, the formal institutions, became controlled by these institutions that were supposed to be temporary, filling the gaps until these public institutions are reactivated. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fauzi. We will get back to you in the following part. We will ask now a question that is directly linked to the Parliament and the National Defense Committee. And I will ask the question to Ms. Rabia concerning the lack of the security track in the political agreements. And my question would be, why is there a continuity of divisions in the security tasks and the opportunity of stability and political transformation? I'll give you the floor, Mrs. Rabia.
First, we would like to thank you for welcoming us and for this webinar at this very sensitive time. And we see that in the political and security situations, the situation of the situation in Yemen is very tense, and even security issues are considered all over the territory, and we can see that events and the clashes are taking place in the capital and all over the territory. So the political division is at the level of these groups. So when we talk about political division, the political division from the beginning of the revolution is that the revolution had no project. At the beginning, we saw that the revolution was pushed by the civil society. And when we see how the revolution started in Benghazi and how Abdel Fattah was assassinated, and it was a very bad incident, and this leader would have been a great leader for unification. And for the success of any revolution, there should be a spiritual leader and a leader who can take care. So every time, so we had assassinations and violent clashes, the crisis of the banks and the social crisis and the oil prices, and all these had repercussions. In 2013, there was a project whereby the Ministry of Justice, in fact, focused on the law of the supremacy of the law. And we, in the civil society, we were having dialogues in the various main cities in the north, the south, and the west. And we tried to see from the people what are their hopes and aspirations, and we saw what the military councils had as impacts, and how people could take the control after the fall of the state. And then we saw the ecological and social and economic repercussions, and later on we had the National General Conference, and there was a law that was issued. I'm trying to remember the name of the law. So it was the political exclusion, and new political tensions erupted, and and instead of going forward and in understanding each other and having laws that help us build our country and the state. In fact, we were very far away from the state because nobody knew what was the structure of the state. So we're hearing a lot about democracy and Republican states, and this exclusion, political exclusion law was voted, and the new ideologies were included, and there were Islamic groups that entered on the scene, and this led to more dissension and those groups used social media and uh, and some people had different positions, and there was a fear from assassination, and this led the people to have stances and positions that are not really true. However, today we need to see and find a solution to this dissension. In fact, there are cities that have no real political um, role, and we should see what those groups who launched the revolution at the time, and today they are outside of the state, and even those who are within the state are limited in terms of activities, and everybody is waiting when those groups would sit together and discuss their issues, and everybody is waiting. Everybody in the diaspora is also waiting when we will have a unified uh, House of Representative, and when we can have an agreement that can include all parties and the groups. So the Libyan society in general is before difficult choices, and in fact, the issue of confidence is a real issue, and we need uh, to uh, to really restore the confidence. Today, we see violations of human rights, and all these violations are on social media. And we see that there are security apparatus that are attached to the state that are conducting these violent clashes. Today, we can see that the groups, the fighting groups, are having covers in every stage. Everyone who thinks of rebuilding the institutions thinks about their security and need about the safety of their families. So those activists think 100 times before trying to rebuild the institutions. Thank you, Ms. Rabiha. Thank you for these notes, and thank you for the analysis and the understanding of the situation. Even if there is a difference between the different parties, I believe that since last year we've been discussing all these issues, and everybody knows that we need to focus on the solutions. And in fact, we need to suggest a gradual roadmap for building trust and unifying security institutions. And under this title, we have three questions. And first, we would like to see what is the phased approach to security sector unification. And we need to see what are the stages, the priorities, and the methodology. For example, there is a very important point that was launched by or mentioned by Ms. Rabia is the crisis of the banking sector. And for more than 2 or 3 years, the banking sector was under the control of the armed groups. And I believe that after there were solutions proposed. Those armed groups let go of the banking sector because they had no more interest from it. As for the gradual roadmap for building trust and unifying security institutions, and particularly stages, priorities, and methodology. Please, the question is addressed to you, Dr. Arif. I will not analyze the past because this is very painful, but we need to look at the solutions that are today possible at the light of what is today available at the international, local, national level. We have the solutions of the consultative committee, and here we are before choices. What was published is the executive summary. I heard that the committee had some choices and picked the first choice, that is the presidential and parliamentary elections, but for a reason or another, the commission chose to suggest all choices, and this is what happened. One, two, three, four. We in the coalition of reviving Libya, we picked the first choice, and if that when that was not possible, we chose the fourth choice. That is a forum for all Libyans to have a new institutional contract, social contract. However, the solution is possible. However, today there are political parties that are not legitimate, and however these political institutions are still there, and the Commission can, or the UN SMIL can unite all these parties in Geneva under the flag of the United Nations, so that no one country will be upset of this choice. So we can go to Geneva again, and the parliament or the head of the Libyan House of Representatives and the president and can be invited. And if there was a conflict on the head of the Council of the State and the Presidential Council and the Vice President, and if there is an issue on both, so all three presidents can come to the meeting, as well as the higher president of the justice and one or two parliamentarians. So what's really important is to have all three authorities represented, the legislative and the executive and and the judiciary to be united under the flag of the United Nations and be given 5 days only to form an emergency government. And if this government is formed, the president will take an engagement in front of the UN that this new government will be supported in Tripoli and will be given the international legitimacy, and the current government will fall, that is in Tripoli, as well as the government in Benghazi as well will fall. And this unified and united government will unite the institutions and prepare for the elections. As to the security part, the over five commission did a lot of efforts, and these efforts should not be wasted. First, they were able to sustain the ceasefire and made a lot of common meetings and met in Tripoli and Benghazi. And there was also a track to unify the security and military institutions in Cairo, and more than 6 meetings took places between the chief of the chief of staff, and all these common endeavors should be used and taken benefit from. So the 5+5 committee should be a higher National Security Council to which the presidents of the governorates from the north and the south can be added, and thus we'll have a National Security Council that unifies all efforts. There is a security coordination, and thank God that there is a coordination between the north and the south. And the chief of staff met already, and the colleagues from the 5+5 committee met together and discussed issues. And in fact, it is easy to have a unified council that can unify strategic and security and military efforts for Libya in general, and to support an emergency government that can pave the way for presidential and parliamentary elections. And in fact, no legitimacy in Libya can take place without that. We've been postponing presidential elections since 2011. In 2014, the parliament, after having met in the National General Conference, gave the ball to the Libyan House of Representatives to set a date for the presidential elections, and but they postponed the presidential elections, and in fact the legislative and the executive issues were mixed up, and so we've been postponing the presidential elections since 2011. We met in 2018 in Paris, and it was decided to hold the presidential elections in 2018, and then these were postponed again in 2021. Everything was prepared, the voting cards and the list of the final candidates was published by the UN SMIL, but then we were surprised by the violent events. So we don't know what was the force majeure, in fact, that made us postpone the elections that were very close. So I believe that the roadmap is not that difficult. If it were a will, a political, a national and regional and international will. So it is possible that all those parties unite, not necessarily in Morocco or in Egypt. They can meet in Geneva and decide within 5 days. And if a decision is not met, so this issue will go to the courts. And if if no decision is made to have an emergency government in 5 days, we can go to the courts, and the higher judiciary council can also decree an emergency government for Libya. So this was an official proposal that we presented to the United Nations, and we explained it to the UN SMIL in a 3-hour meeting. So this is a proposal to put an end to the political division. And if the 5+5 committee is adopted, and we add the security and military chiefs from the East and the West in a higher national council. And finally, I would like to say that the solution in Libya starts by changing the mentalities, the mentality. First, the mentality of the institutions and the positions, the high positions are like war gains that can be taken by those families and tribes who prevail. And there is also another concept that is that the revolution gives certain legitimacy to dominate the people. So this was an old principle of 1969 and was renewed in 2011. So the statements that were issued in the name of the revolution of that and that town. So I believe that those who in 2011 today, those who are leading the revolution or behind the revolutions or the so-called revolutions were only 5 to 6 years old in 2011. And this concept of revolution is against the concept of the constitution. And we need to really change the mentality of that the institutions are are the gains and the spoils of war. And it is said that the state only can rise with the with the state monopolizing the arms. Sometimes these ideologies are in the hand of a certain tribe, but the idea of monopolizing the arm and taking the legitimacy and power can be done. That is why we need all the political parties should go to Geneva. And finally, the problem of this continuity of the crisis in Libya is the international community itself, because the UN sometimes recognizes the parliament and then sometimes takes its recognition. So this in itself leads to division. If the UN and the Security Council did not recognize this division of legitimacy, we wouldn't have been here. Because I believe in the theory of conspiracy. It is as if the Libyan people is doomed to live this continuous division. And the Darna clashes, and may God have the souls of those who died after the dam exploded. So we know that the Libyan party is a unified party that cannot be divided, and all divisions and all clashes are made up by external parties to dismantle and disintegrate the Libyan party, who has always been a united people and a united nation who can be reunited with political will. So we only need to unite all these components, the political parties, and give them a choice, and to select or to appoint an emergency government, and if not, the higher judiciary council will choose.
Mr. Fauzi, I would like to ask you the same question, and I would like to ask you one additional question concerning your vision for the incremental approach that could be implemented to unify the security sector. The second question, what could this approach overcome any security gap and put an end to any threats against the institutions in Libya? And I would like you to also highlight the fact that we have the prosecution office in Libya that did not divide and remained unified. Maybe we could study this case and benefit from it. So I would like to see your vision on the incremental approach, the possible incremental approach to unify the security sector in Libya. Thank you for the question. I would like to reiterate that the security track cannot be separated from all the other tracks, as I mentioned before. In order for this track to succeed, we need to find a solution to the political situation and try to also find a solution to the political division that was taking place in Libya lately, because anything that takes place, whether at the level of the 5+5 committee or all the other things that will take place, if there were no political, executive, and parliamentary authority that is unified in Libya, we cannot move forward with any file. The second question would be, will the security situation stay as is, or can it stay as is until this unified legislative and executive authority in Libya be able to unify? Of course not, because the security situation or security is something, is a daily life thing for people, similar to food, air they breathe. So we cannot disregard this security track and tell the people to resist all these violations and fear they are living through until the political situation becomes better. That is why it is very important to rely on the previous experiences and the work that has been done, whether in the 5+5 committee or all the other security measures that were been put in place, whether in Sirat or in Geneva. It is important to rely on these, study them, and know why they weren't implemented. There's no need today for the 5+5 committee work, although it is a military kind of work. So this committee might be able to propose the things when it comes to the security track, and we needed to study the military and security situation in Libya based on international standards and based on the needs of the Libyan people. We need to know what is the army size needed for Libya, what is the security agency size needed for Libya, what are the risks that Libya is facing, what is the budget needed in Libya in order for the army and the police to be able to be effective. So I think we need for this studies and figures, even if the implementation was not really accurate. At least we would start by setting standards for any coming authority. What is taking place in the western or in the eastern region is the lack of vision. The armies that are being built and the budgets spent are not based on principles. We need to know the enemy that we need to face. We need to know the risks that we will be facing, and therefore to prepare our security and army staff for this reason. And of course, in this, we rely on several criteria: size of the population, the geographical situation of the country, the risks the country faces, the budget that could be provided, and the expenditures needed. So several criteria must be taken into account and revised in order to draft the coming project based on these criteria. On the other hand, we have a number of decisions that were issued by several authorities in Libya to establish security and military institutions for several reasons and in several circumstances. We can't dig deep in these now, but I think what we need a specific, special entity that establishes a statistical study on these institutions, their number, how to work on these, and through this we can propose a solution to put an end to this situation that we are living currently in Libya, and the reasons behind the conflict. I think that the main problem in Libya is that the pyramid is upside down. The weakest part of the cycle was the government. And the Ministry of Interior was the weakest at the security level. At the military level, the weakest was the Minister of Defense. So we see rings or strength in specific institutions, parallel institutions that have all the authority and all the power, while his commander-in-chief cannot take any decision. All these are or have reasons, and we need to study these reasons, analyze these reasons, and prepare a comprehensive vision in order for the unified executive authority to play its role properly. In addition to this, we need to discuss the funding sources. These institutions have several sources. The first source was the national budget given by the government. This has been developed to these entities wanting to strengthen themselves and not be under the control of the government. And therefore, they produced or found other sources to receive additional funds away from the appropriation given to it from the government. And that, of course, was done in the light, and the government, the parliament, the state council all knew about this and took no measures whatsoever against it. So, in my opinion, the coming work should be scientific, institutionalized, based on international standards and internal standards, based on the real needs of the Libyan people and the Libyan state, in order to be able to reach the security service, whether at the military level, at border protection, institution protection, or at the level of economy and the daily life of people, their institutions, and stability, until we reach the building of the state and as a whole. All this is what we lack in Libya, and what is we really lack is the decision making. We were working, or we have seen at Sirat security measures, and the council engaged to work on these measures. The measures included the general plans and specific plans, and these were established by Libyan experts with the support of international experts. If the council was implementing these plans, we wouldn't have reached this situation. The presidential council took over power in Tripoli, the capital, and unfortunately it started working against what has been agreed upon, and it had exempted or excluded the public institutions, and he has given the parallel institutions funds and powers and authorities. If you see the decisions taken by this presidential council, through which he has given authority to these parallel entities, you cannot imagine the things that he has provided them when it comes to mandates. And if we have political will, it would be easier to discuss all these topics, and it would be easier to stop the fundings of to these parallel institutions, and it would be, of course, easier to integrate them in the state institutions in a way that does not rely on fear from gap or vacuum. We do not have any vacuums or gaps, so we have an excess of staff, in fact. And in fact, there is no security whatsoever for any entity. Even the ministers are being threatened. So these several security agencies and the funds that were spent did not achieve any of the security that was requested from them, and the security that was provided was very weak, and that could collapse in a moment. So these agencies had additional mandates that exceed the mandates of ministries and other formal security institutions. They are stronger than the government and the parliament and all the public institutions, and they try to serve international agendas. This is the situation in Libya. This is the reverse pyramid that needs to be fixed, and we need to review all the security work that is taking place as well as the military work. And I can mention an opportunity here to at least try to decrease the impact of security problems in Libya. The international community has a problem. The UN SMIL has a problem, has a role to play, and the parliament, the state council, and the other governments, local governments also should play a role, since they are in the scene and they are controlling the situation in Libya. When this is achieved, when things are ready, while taking in parallel procedures that might also decrease the role of these parallel agencies and their work inside Libya, we might see a harmonious pace of work until we reach unified government and the elections that will produce these unified entities that of course lead us to the expected state. In my opinion, all these things must be launched quickly, and you must shed lights on this locally and internationally. We must see media coverage of these ideas in order for the people to support any movement that takes place in this frame. And we mustn't allow any selective measures. We need to review all the institutions in Libya, and then the executive authority will start implementing based on a specific plan in order to provide guarantees for all the parties in order to put an end to this problem. So the situation we are living in is an exceptional situation that requires extraordinary decisions. Every party has the right to have demands, but they need to take into account the situation on the ground and react realistically to it in order to reach the results that we are all aiming at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fauzi.
We reached the last 7 minutes of our seminar. We will try to give you a summary of the most important points. And of course, we recorded the session. We will try to summarize the most important points in order to mention in the document that will be discussed in less than a month. And we will try in a way or another to hold a certain workshop in order to be able to reach a good proposal to be presented to the decision makers, taking into account all the parties, Western or Eastern. We are one Libya, and we will try to present one proposal. I will start to mention the most important points that were mentioned. Of course, Dr. Arif mentioned that the security track was not lacking in the agreements, but they weren't implemented properly in most of the political tracks or agreements. The most important were in 2015, 2020, and 2021. Mr. Fauzi agreed with Dr. Arif around the same idea, and he also mentioned that the armed groups unfortunately weren't integrated properly in the security sector because of the lack of methodology, and unfortunately, the armed conflicts were able to control the security sector in Libya, but not completely. Mrs. Rabia mentioned the project of the Ministry of Justice related to the sovereignty of the law, and that project, of course, also included impunity and the rule of law. And the Guatemala example was an example to be followed. So a comparative study was made. In other points were mentioned concerning the political isolation because of a law. Mrs. Rabia also mentioned that there is no protection for those who try to make some reform in Libya. And this is unfortunately as a result of the all the parties that are trying to spread the chaos and political division. In the second part, proposals were mentioned, and among which were the outputs of the consultative committee. Dr. Arif mentioned that this outcome would be very important, that should be benefited from, and we should build on the outcomes of the 5+5 committee and the Cairo track, which is the security track. Should build on these efforts and not marginalize them. One of the proposals also was establishing a higher National Security Council that works on setting policies in order to restructure and unify the security sector. We also mentioned the political deadlocks and how are these two tracks, the political and the security, interlinked, and how are the political situations affecting the security situation in Libya. We also mentioned the dogma of security institutions in Libya and their loyalty. We mentioned the organizational structure of the state in Libya, and we saw that the weakest part of this chain is the government. And unfortunately, we see a weakness when it comes to ministers. So a future proposal to unify the security sector and to restructure the public sector requires specific standards that need to be relied on. And this is a very important point that Mr. Fauzi mentioned and was discussed in previous sessions, because when we look at the structure of the Ministry of Interior, we see that it is overstaffed. And we see, for example, 8,000 or 10,000 in a ministry that does not need more than 1,000 personnel. A 5+5 committee is not enough anymore. We need an additional committee that supports this 5+5 committee that has achieved success in implementing its mandate. We also mentioned complex issues such as recruiting children, the budgets spent by the armed groups, their dogmas, and what we need among the solutions is a complete restructuring, including the security levels that we need in Libya. We also mentioned the negativity of some of the international community and the way they deal with some of the armed groups and security institutions that are involved in crimes, whether against the Libyans or the non-Libyans, and they were welcomed in some of these countries openly, and this is against national and international compacts. And one last point, we mentioned that the dogma of the institutional or security institutions, the army, should be clear. And we mentioned finally that there shouldn't be selectiveness when it comes to citizenship. It should rely on one criteria that is unified and very accurate and specific. Finally, I would like to thank my speakers, Dr. Arif, Mr. Fauzi, Ms. Rabia. I would like to thank IFIT and Lias, that is working with us until now to formulate documents, solutions, and policies that might help Libya reach stability. Would like to thank all the participants, and we promise you that we will send you any update concerning any possible document. Through this seminar, we will try to draft a short document in less than a month that will mention all the solutions, whether discussed here or given by other experts. Thank you so much.